Hey everyone, Pugs here with one new review for y'all. As you can see by my groovy and righteous presence here, today I'm covering SpongeBob SquarePants versus the Big One, which is a special that for some reason I always picture as a TV movie. It is not, it's the standard 22 minutes you'd expect from a special episode, but it just feels so long, probably because it actually juggles like 3 different plots, which is unusual for this show. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me bring it back. As always, thank you to everyone for watching my videos. Y'all are still very much appreciated, especially right now as getting videos out has been a bit difficult as of late, but y'all give me the motivation to push through and keep them coming. Now, let's just get right into it. Alright, so in the interest of full disclosure, let me just tell you that I've been very freaking excited to review SpongeBob SquarePants versus the Big One. Because here's the thing, I'm not gonna hold y'all in suspense, I love this special. Like, it's one of my favorite specials in the show, and yes, I know that I'm in the minority when I say those two things, especially the second one, but y'all have just gotta hear me out. I feel like that's what half of this review is gonna be, me trying to convince y'all to love this special like I do. Hey, I just want to convert some people to my side. Is that so bad? Let's begin. The start of SpongeBob SquarePants versus the Big One, and ugh, that is a mouthful, I will not be saying that a lot, is sort of like the inverse of Krabs a la mode, where SpongeBob and Squidward are dying of heat stroke instead of freezing. And then it's, of course, Mr. Krabs at fault for this because of his cheap ways. There's also some neat visual gags in this part, like SpongeBob's melted shoes, and the power bill joke was pretty brilliant, I must say. I just really like how this episode evokes the feeling of those dog days of summer, especially once we move on over to Goo Lagoon. It's kind of funny that I'm reviewing this episode now, considering it's literally December, and I'm writing this script and it's freaking cold as balls outside. But hey, maybe if I've got some watchers in the southern hemisphere, this episode will be more relevant to you. Anyway, speaking of Goo Lagoon, I really love how Season 6 has apparently decided that it's going to bring this location back, and I'm thanking it for that. So, Mr. Krabs' business scheme here is to bring the Krusty Krab to the customers by packing up and going to the beach. I love how this episode is actually somewhat realistic about the issues that would come with having a restaurant out on the water, because who carries their wallet with them when they go swimming? Even with the advent of using your phone to pay, nobody's bringing their damn phone in the water. Anyway, I love how this section at Goo Lagoon really sets this episode up, introducing all of our key players now that Sandy and Patrick have arrived. I'm just glad that Sandy is included here because, as we'll come to see later, the show starts utilizing a core 4 instead of a big 5 structure for many of its specials, cough cough truth or square, cough, and I'm not much a fan of that. Once Sandy and Patrick are brought into the fold, this episode kicks off into high gear, and I kind of just really like this sequence of events. They're just amusing to me. Patrick trying to keep everyone from falling off the surfboard acts as a propeller for the thing in some funny looking visuals and voice acting, and this causes Mr. Krabs, SpongeBob SquidWard, and Patrick to crash into Sandy, which sends all of them flying very far away from Goo Lagoon. One thing I can mention here as the setup portion ends is that the pacing in this special is really good in my opinion, so that's a strength of this episode. It's from this point that the episode splits itself along 3 plot lines, like I mentioned in the introduction. For ease of reviewing's sake, I'll just cover each of the 3 separately. I'll start with doing Mr. Krabs' plot and then Sandy's, since they technically occupy the spaces of side plots for this episode. Starting with Mr. Krabs' section of SpongeBob SquarePants versus the Big One, I really love the way that horror elements are utilized in his scenes, utilized to comedic effect of course, especially for the first bit we get of him realizing where he is. There's a great trade-off between horror and humor and melodrama, perfect for being stuck out in the middle of the ocean. And not just any random part of the middle of the ocean, but Dutchman's Triangle, because yes, we're getting a guest appearance by my boy, the Flying Dutchman, so that's yet another way this episode gives me a win. I love the interactions between the Dutchman and Mr. Krabs, and as I watch, I'm reminded so much of Born Again Krabs in the way that their dynamic plays out, which is a good bit of consistency. I liked the part where Mr. Krabs tried to swear on his aunt's false teeth, but somehow, because the Dutchman dated her in high school, he knows that she doesn't have false teeth. I also love the way that their little conflict is resolved in the end, with the Flying Dutchman being stuck in Davy Jones's locker. Like, that was hilarious, especially with the man himself being green screened in there. I love moments like that where the show just truly gets random and it makes jokes and references that kids won't get. Hell, I don't really get it either, given that I have no idea who Davy Jones actually is. Another little thing I like with Mr. Krabs throughout this episode was his attachment to his cash register, giving it a whole name and everything. That's something that Mr. Krabs already does in the show, but in the context of this episode, it's clearly meant to be a reference to the movie Castaway with the volleyball Wilson. Moving on over to Sandy's plot, I'll admit right off the bat that I'm a little saddened that she's the character we spend the least time with. If the Conch Street trio are the A or primary plot and Mr. Krabs is the B or secondary plot, then Sandy is the C or tertiary plot. And I know exactly why this is, but like always, that's the big elephant in the room that I continue to leave unspoken until I actually feel like doing a deep dive analysis into the misogyny of this show, and I don't want to do that. So I'll just say that I enjoy the time with her that we do get, as short as it is. It's always nice to see her being a queen, even though I wish that we actually got to see it. Moving on. Considering the existence of episodes like To Save a Squirrel, it makes perfect sense that she'd be doing just fine on this random island. And then I like how when she goes searching for everyone else, she literally crashes into Mr. Krabs' plot, but not for long. It's also a shame that she never fully intersects with the A plot until the very end of the episode, when the three different plots are irrelevant. And of course, when she lands at Goo Lagoon, she's subject to xenophobia as a joke again. I'm telling you, this is a real problem. Let me just move on though. So I now can talk about the main plot of this special, which involves SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward. I like all the new characters these three meet, from Twitch and his friends to JKL, and I just like the plot of their sections of the episode. It's engaging. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward are forced to learn how to surf if they want to get back to Bikini Bottom, and I think that's interesting and helps this episode lean further into the tropical and surf aesthetics, given that Sandy and Mr. Krabs' plots don't really lend themselves to that. Well, Sandy's could have if it was given more time, but I digress. The montage of everyone learning how to surf is great, and I liked the narration that went along with it. And fun fact, since I learned this, the narrator in this part is Bruce Brown, a documentary director who is apparently known as the pioneer of surf film, so that's super cool. This episode has some deep-cut guest stars. Actually, this whole show has some deep-cut guest stars. Unfortunately, the other notable guest star in this episode is an abusive piece of shit, so I will not be giving any attention to him. Anyway, from here, SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick are forced to seek out the tutelage of JKL, as they're just so inept at learning how to surf. After a nice montage that I'll discuss in a little bit, we finally meet JKL. This scene, where he walks out of his hut with that long-ass surfboard, is one of the most memorable parts of this episode for me. It's just so hysterical and makes me laugh a lot. Like, the combination of the music, the anticipation, the reactions, and then the comically long surfboard, just something about how all of these elements are put together really makes this scene just about perfect for me. And I love how Squidward is completely over the guy's pretentiousness. This whole section of the episode brings to mind Club SpongeBob, with Squidward being a justified skeptic versus SpongeBob and Patrick enthusiastically embracing what appears to be bullshit advice. I love how cryptic and pretentious JKL is, never giving a straight answer for anything, ever. After a few minutes of this episode starts to remind us that it is, in fact, a special episode, as the plot suddenly becomes quite intense, with a storm showing up nearly out of nowhere. Not completely out of nowhere, because it was seen at the end of Sandy's segment, so it wasn't all the way unexpected. Though I think the whole "this is the perfect storm that comes when the planets align" was not anyone's bingo card. And I love how, up until this point, this episode was pretty low-key, but now we're standing on top of a random-ass temple talking about planets aligning and prophecies and perfect waves and sacrifices, and I just love it. I mean, we needed to see why this episode was called SpongeBob SquarePants versus the Big One, right? This leads us right into the episode's climax, which also brings Mr. Krabs back into the fold of the main plot. The whole part of SpongeBob and co. trying to surf on this wave was very entertaining to me, and I love how JKL appears out of nowhere to save Mr. Krabs and then Cashy. It's also hilariously dramatic. And in the part where SpongeBob locks the hell in and starts surfing just like JKL was great. I don't know, just all of this is so amusing to me. And then we get to the ending of the episode, so back to Sandy for a second. She washes up on Goo Lagoon and tries to see if her friends are there, and when all seems lost, SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs appear, soaked from head to toe. They rode the Big One all the way back to Bikini Bottom. And I love how there was just a party for them out of nowhere. Like, we go from Sandy panicking to now she's standing there greeting them with a party. Love that. And this ending of the episode is one of my favorite kind of endings. Yes, they're notorious and overused, but I'm a sucker for them. I just love a good dance party ending. They're on the level of everybody laughs in terms of just being happy and fun. I don't know what to tell you. And we pause the dance party for a moment when JKL is revealed to be okay, but then we get right back into it with everybody doing their silly little dances. Just a great ending to this great special. So, before I sum everything up, I wanted to take a moment and say that one thing I really like in this special is the music. First off, there's so many pieces of original music here that we don't see played much outside of this episode, like Surf Swami, which sadly has no clean rips, or Endless Summer Spoof, or Monster Wave. All of these are linked in the description so you know what I'm referring to. I also just liked all of JKL's bongo bits, like they were nice to listen to. And there's also plenty of good surf rock songs in this episode too, like the one that the episode ends on. And then I love Beeline for the Tree Line, the song that plays during the montage of Squidward, SpongeBob, and Patrick trying to get to JKL. No one ever talks about it, probably because most people have forgotten it, but I just love it. That song is accompanied with such beautiful visuals too, so that's a double win for me. Honestly, this episode is full of gorgeous backgrounds. Pretty much every scene taking place on an island is beautiful. Also, this is unrelated, but I didn't know where else to put it. But I really liked the detail of SpongeBob keeping his Krusty Krab hat for the entire episode, whereas Squidward loses his. It's a pretty great way of visually communicating their characters. Alright, so, as you can see, I really like SpongeBob SquarePants versus the Big One. It's such a fun episode, and I think it's been too long since I've had such fun when watching an episode. I also like that even though it is a special and thus raises the stakes accordingly, it doesn't end up taking itself too seriously, really leaning into its own absurdity. I think more episodes should do this. Not that I ever think this show actually takes itself seriously, but sometimes it doesn't lean into the absurd enough for me, which I think is one of the reasons why season 6 has already had so many dull episodes, and perhaps why it will continue to have them. But anyway, bringing it all together, I'd say that this episode most certainly belongs in my amazing tier, where it comes in with a score of 9.5 out of 10. As always, I'll be ending this video with some closing thoughts of mine. There are times when I realize that I have some rather unpopular opinions on this show, and this is one of those times. Because who's out here loving this special like I am? If y'all are out there, show yourselves. I feel like I'm the only one. Not that people dislike this episode, but no one loves it like I do. It's just an amazing episode. I also find it to be quite nostalgic. I mean, I always loved it, so I've seen it a lot, but also that pure summer essence in this episode is also pretty helpful in that regard. Even though I've only gone to a beach a handful of times in my life. Just not really something I do, for multiple reasons. I also think this episode is a bit forgotten, which is a shame, like all forgotten episodes. But yeah, I feel like that's the only real closing thought that I've got for y'all today. So I suppose I'll go ahead and end things here, and I'll see y'all in the next review.